Hello, architecture students. This is a review of the AutoCAD user interface. Okay, so on this user interface, this is what you're looking at. It's called the user interface. Okay, and this is where you select all of your tools, do all of your drawing, do all of your manipulations and everything else. To start with, what I would do is I would take notes on this, and you would take notes. I recommend drawing a rectangle on a sheet of notebook paper in your notebook, and it could be a full, you'll fill up the whole page with this rectangle, and then just kind of draw an arrow sort of pointing to the arrows, and maybe drawing some more rectangles within that rectangle, identifying certain components of the user interface. Okay, I'll start with the first component, and that's going to be the very top right here. So if you've drawn that rectangle, I would drop down from the very top line. It doesn't have to be any specific measurement, but just a thin portion, and recognize this section going all the way across the top. Okay, now this section over here to the left is called your quick access toolbar, and it's where some of the most recently or the most frequently used tools will be located, such as new file, open, save, save as, and then there's two icons here where you can send stuff back and forth between your cell phone or whatever mobile device you're using. Print, then you have your undo and your redo. Right between the undo and redo is a drop-down arrow. You can click and undo a series of functions. Like you might want to go back in time several moves, maybe 10 or 15 different mouse clicks or mouse moves or whatever to undo that. And then, of course, this over here you don't have to worry about too much. One is, I think this one is, yes, where you can add additional things to that quick access toolbar. Now, as you come down, let's see, I'm going to cancel that. Okay, as you come across, this will have your file name. Right now, I'm just in drawing1.dwg. And then on across here, you have a help window, little help where you put a keyword in or something like that. So you can type in draw line, and just hit the enter button, and it'll go online to the Autodesk help and show you articles on how to draw lines. Okay, of course it can get more complicated than that. Okay, don't worry about anything else over here, except for at the very end, of course, you have your minimize, and this is the same on any application in Windows. You have your full minimize where you click on that and it minimizes the program. Then you have your restore down. I click on restore down and it makes a smaller window, and then I click on that button again where it just says maximize, and then it maximizes to the full window of the screen. And then you have the X over here where you close the program altogether. Alright, the next thing on the user interface is the tabs bar. There are tabs up here. All these are tabs. You have Home tab, Insert tab, Annotate tab, View tab, Manage tab, on and on. And what that does is every time you click on one, like if I'm going to click on Home, which is where I'm going to spend most of my time, it gives me a bunch of tools that I would use from that tab that are related to Home, which are going to be your most frequently used tools. Insert tab gives me tools related to inserting documents and blocks and things of that nature. Okay, so you get a whole new set of tools on what we call the ribbon. This is the ribbon, and this is a format that Microsoft and other applications for computers are starting to copy after, and so that they're all sort of generalized. But this layout includes a ribbon. So this is all a ribbon. And then within that ribbon, there are darker lines that separate sections of the ribbon. These are called panels. Okay, so here you have the draw panel. It says draw right here. Here you have the modify panel, and it says modify right here. And the tools that are on these panels are tools that are associated with drawing here and modifying what you have drawn here. And then on and on, there's several different panels. Each tab will have a ribbon with several different panels. All right. Now under the ribbon, you have the drawing tabs. This is where you might have several different drawings open, and you can just click this plus mark to add another drawing, and you can click the X mark on that drawing to close it. And of course you can have as many open on here, but of course it takes more computer power to have many of them on there. Oftentimes that will slow down your computer and slow down your work if you have a lot of them open. Below the tabs, of course, is your drawing area. That's all this is just a drawing area. That's where you do your drawing. Over to the right upper side in the drawing area is what we call the view cube. Or it's basically just the navigation tools. And I'm going to draw just a couple of lines here real quick so I can show you something. Now over here you can actually spin your drawing, or spin like you would spin a piece of paper, so you can get a different perspective of the paper. And you spin that with these arrows up here. There's one that's kind of pointing to the left and one that's sort of pointing down to the right. And you just spin the paper, or spin the drawing area like so, either direction. Okay, and you can tell which way you're looking by looking at the view cube, and you see north, east, south, west. And that is how we refer to our drawings as well, is that north, south, east, and west. South, just remember this, south is always the front of your design, the front of your house. Okay, we do it that way for communication purposes. The cube itself we don't use until we get into three-dimensional drawing, so I'm not really going to go into that. You also have a home button up here, so if you ever get lost or whatever, I think it'll just, well, it takes you to an what do they call that? An isometric drawing home. So we really don't want to do that. But if you ever get into this and you did click that home button and you got into the isometric view, just click on that top button right there in the view cube, and it'll go back straight up and down. Okay, this over here is another navigation section, or navigation bar, and it has a couple of tools that you may not use. I don't use many of them on here except for zoom. I'll use zoom, which is right here. But anyway, this one, if you click, it gives you a widget that's attached to your cursor. That widget really gets in the way a lot, but it has things like zoom and orbit and pan and rewind and stuff like that on there. But if you open that, just kind of click this little plus mark to close it. I've never used it. It's just kind of a redundant tool, I guess. You have the pan tool right here, which if you click on the pan tool, you can pan around the screen by holding your left mouse button down. Okay, and then releasing that left mouse button, and it does not pan anymore. Okay, and then click on the pan tool, I think, to turn that off, or no, maybe we have to hit the escape tool. Yeah, hit the escape tool or the escape button on your keyboard, and that will get you out of that pan tool. Zoom works pretty good. You've got several choices under zoom. You can zoom extents, which talks about the extents of the drawing. You can zoom window, which means you can draw a window around some objects and then click this zoom window, and it will zoom into that section, kind of like this. See, it zoomed right into that section. Okay. Zoom previous, zoom real time. Just kind of have to play around with those to see how those work. But as long as you know how to zoom extents and zoom windows, you're fine. And I'll show you what else that you'll be fine with. Is once I get out of that, hit the escape button to release that tool. Spin your mouse wheel. There's a wheel on your mouse. If you spin it, you're zooming in and out. Okay, and you're panning also. If you press that mouse button on your mouse in the center of your mouse, you pan the screen. Okay, so you don't have to go over here and click on those tools. You can just use them right from your mouse. Real easy. Orbit we don't worry about because that is used in three-dimensional drawing. And this right here is some kind of like video thing where you can sort of record what your drawing process. I've never really used it a whole lot, or really at all, to be honest with you. But that's what that is. Down below is your command line. Command line is where you can type commands, and AutoCAD will basically follow that command. And you'll also see that it's very useful, because every time you do something, like if I'm going to draw a line, I'm going to click on this line right here, the line tool. You can see that in the command line, it tells me what to do next. It tells me I'm in the line tool, and then it says to specify the first point. So it wants me to specify that first point. But also, look in these boxes that are right next to the cursor, and the ones that follow the cursor around. That is also says specify first point. So you can get instructions both from here and from the little box that shows up next to your cursor. All right, now the other little boxes that show up there to the right of specify first point, that's where you can specify your measurements, or right now it's wanting me to specify a Cartesian coordinate for that first point. But I'm just going to click to create a point, and then you see as I draw, there is a distance right here at the top that is currently highlighted in blue, and I can type a distance like 10 units and then click the enter button, and I get a 10-unit line. Okay, but that's how all of that works with the dynamic input. Again, let me show you that again. So right next to the cursor is dynamic input. Down here is command line. I don't remember if I said this was dynamic input before, but that's what it is. So all the boxes connected to that is called dynamic input. All right, we'll go on to the next item. Okay, so below the command line, we have 3 more tabs over here to the left. And those tabs, right now we're in what's called the model tab. And that's where we do all our modeling and drawing and things like that. Now these other 2 tabs are layout tabs. So those is basically a preview of your print. And that's, if you're going to print something, that's how you would set it up. By clicking on one of those tabs and going to that space. And right now I'm clicking on them. I'm not sure why it's not going there, but don't worry about it right now, because we're not going to mess with it until much later on anyway. Over to the right, you have like a status bar. Okay, and this is kind of the status of your work in progress, some of the settings and all that are involved. Right here is your grid setting. So I can click on that grid tool right here, and that turns my grids on and off. This next one is your snap mode for snapping to the grids. I don't use that one, and I don't recommend that you do. It's kind of cumbersome. This one is always on. It's called restrict cursor to specified angles, and if you click on the drop down arrow right next to it, then you get selections of different angles that you can snap your cursor to. I always keep mine at 45, 90, 135, 180. How does that work? Well, if I'm drawing a line like this, you can see that green guideline pop up. So it's going to pop up every 45 degrees, and my cursor will snap. I mean, it's not going to lock, but it will snap to those angles. Okay, so that's what that does. The next one that is on, it's kind of blue looking, is show snapping reference line. That is that green line. That's telling the computer to show that line. And then we've got snap behaviors. So if I am going to draw a line, I can get certain things to snap so I can reference certain points, such as the end point of this line. And I just hover over the end point. I don't click, I just hover over, and it turns on a reference line. Okay, I hover over it again, it turns that reference line off. There's endpoint lines, there's also midpoint lines, there's intersection snapping lines, and you can actually change some of the behaviors by clicking on this drop down arrow next to it, and you'll actually turn on and off different snapping reference points, such as your endpoints, your midpoints, your centers, geometric centers, nodes, quadrants of circles, and things like that. Okay, so that's what all of that does. Further to the right, you have your drawing scale. Right now we're just working in 1-to-1 scale. We'll work in some other scales a little bit later. But this is where you would change your scales. And we're always going to be working in these scales right here, which are your imperial measurement scales. Typically 1/4 inch equals 1 foot is what we typically work in. Of course, right now just leave it as 1-to-1 ratio. And then finally is this one right here, which you may not even have this one turned on in your settings. If you go all the way to the right here, these 3 lines on the right, if you click on that and then find the units right here, if you click on it and the check mark shows next to it, that means that it is on. So right now we're working in decimal units. That's what all of this does. All this just turns on different status symbols that lets you sort of see what your status currently is. But in the decimal setting, if I was to click on the drop down arrow, I would see more stuff like architectural, which is what we will be working in the future. Then there's engineering, fractional, scientific, and so forth and so on. So that is the drawing interface. That is the AutoCAD interface. Get to know it very well, and on your notes, just draw, arrows and name these certain areas. Draw some extra lines to sort of separate the areas. And again, you can use that on your test or on your, not on your AutoCAD certification test, but just on your classroom test, you'll be able to use that. Okay, that is all for this video. Thank you very much.